much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be, I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit, and now here's your host, Rich Barris.
And thank you, Don. Welcome to Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I am your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. Join on Locals, or actually, if you're watching on YouTube, that's great. Try to sign up for Rumble. All right, head on over to rumble.com/People's Pundit. It's in the description, and sign up. When you're there, check out the Locals community right up there, peoplespundit.locals.com. All right, so it's Freewheeling Friday. All right, we're going to have our Q&A. We're going to do our normal gig, our normal shtick here. But today we're going to go over, obviously, it's in Ukraine. And we're going to go over some basics here. Because every time there's a foreign policy crisis or a foreign policy debate in this country, the smarter people never have the floor. That's just the truth. It's amazing to me that neocons and neoliberals, all right, are supposed to be the educated ones in our country, and are supposed to be the ones, who look down on all of the dirty masses and say, we don't follow science, right? We don't follow this. We don't listen to academia here. And no other issue really exemplifies what a fraud that is, other than, more than foreign policy. And you got to bear with us. We got a little one. All right, back. Really just came off a plane a few hours ago. So yeah, when you look at foreign policy academia, they completely disagree with the decades and decades and decades and decades of nonsense that the foreign policy establishment and elites in this country have produced, policy platforms that they have produced. And they have sold it to the country in the most dishonest of ways. They talk one way, but their interests are completely opposed to the rhetoric that they use. And nowhere in academia are any of their theories defended, heralded as serious scholarship. And one reason why I loved international relations so much is that it kind of tied both of my worlds together. And I love math because it speaks the universal language, but I love politics. I always have. And in international relations, as you can with public policy, any domestic, whatever it is, these theories can, or the soundness of these theories can be proven or disproven using empirical data. So there are arguments that could be made, and they're not opinion. Some are right and some are wrong. And in foreign policy academia, there is generally one school that dominates it all. But what happens across all of the schools and even within each school of thought is that somebody will release a book or somebody will have come before them, and they'll either build on that theory or they'll go after it. And somebody's going to be right and somebody's going to be wrong. And the beautiful thing about foreign policy is, as time goes on, those questions where they're both just really good arguments, as time goes on, we will find out who is right and who is wrong. So if we can't look back into history and say, you know what, I get your argument, but it doesn't really bore out, it isn't really true, then we can do that and we can settle that debate right then and there. But many debates have been left open up into interpretation until an event happens that proves or disproves one of their arguments. It's a beautiful thing. There is no room for safe spaces. There is no room for crybabies. There's no room for idealism. It is what it is. And actually, there are schools that are very idealistic, but you will see, because I have a list of books here on my desk that we are going to go over. I'm going to explain to you the projection or how or the the progress of international relations and I wish I had time to go over like 10 more, but I'll give them a hat tip as we talk about their worth in that progression. But generally, I don't. Even in a 2-hour show, I do not. All right. So we're going to take what I think, especially with dealing with Ukraine right now, is particularly someone's work is particularly prescient. Okay. All right. So where do we begin? So all right. First one and foremost, E.H. Carr, the 20 Years Crisis. Anyone who knows anything about international relations will tell you that if you want to learn or have some basic view of how people view the world, you must read this book. E.H. Carr was writing during the Great War, the 20 Years Crisis, the period between the First and Second World Wars. And he is definitely a realist, although he's a different kind of real. And by the way, realism dominates. There's a lot of different schools. You know, you have neoconservatism, which is the laughing stock of academia. Neoliberalism is the second laughing stock of academia. Here's the problem, though. It's going to be first soon. Because neoconservatism, as I was explaining to you, events will prove who is right and who is not. Neoconservatism had its moment and was proven especially folly. So now people like Bill Kristol, there are literally pictures of Bill Kristol and his daddy in books on international relations to any graduate or undergraduate student, and you can move on to graduate school. But there are pictures of these idiots in books like, don't do this, they're stupid. And yet somehow they still not dominate, but certainly populate the halls of our foreign policy elite establishments like the State Department. And increasingly so, unfortunately, the Pentagon. The one good thing that was keeping America out of even more stupid conflicts is that the State Department and the Pentagon used to butt heads quite a bit. You had in the Pentagon and the Defense Department a lot of people who basically were realists, all right? And generally speaking, I mean, in the Pentagon and Defense Department, and generally speaking, they definitely viewed the world as a more, the realpolitik. And the State Department had all of these dumb theories, which we're going to come across now. Like, if the entire world was just a democracy, then it wouldn't be war. That, of course, is an incredibly stupid theory that has been completely debunked. And in fact, the father of it, one of the fathers of it, Bruce Russert, grasping the democratic peace, couldn't even defend his thesis in academia. He was laughed out by the panel. So instead, he decided, how am I going to make a living? Let me sell this nonsense to politicians who are more stupid than I am. What group of people can I find dumber than me to believe my stupid theories? Politicians! Let's go to Washington, D.C., which is a running joke. If you can't defend your thesis, it's a running joke in academia. If you cannot defend your thesis, go work for the State Department.
You got a job.
The sad thing is this has had real impact. Real impact. And by the way, this is a great example of what I was saying, where you can merge my worlds together. If you're a math guy, but you have a passion for politics and international relations, Bruce Russert is a perfect example of why it's kind of important to have skills in both those arenas. Bruce Russert tried to use different states. Here's a great graph right here. He tried to use different stats to prove that democracies wouldn't war with each other. And of course, unless you're a math guy, you won't find, or just, schooled in basic arithmetic, you won't be able to find the real flaws in his argument, which is to say that he defined war differently for different conflicts to make his theory work. You could point out one example and you'd say, well, that's not really a war. I mean, there was only 3 tanks and 5 rocket launchers. I'm not even sure they use armored personnel carriers in there. So we can't really classify that as a war. But then he'd go on to a next example where he would say, see, this is an example of where 2 democracies came back from the brink. And yet there were 5 tanks instead, right? I mean, it was ripped apart. He was laughed out. And people like Bill Clinton were the only ones to sell this to. And Bill Clinton's foreign policy doctrine was basically grounded in the democratic peace theory. This is what we have now. Bosnia, Yugoslavia, Croatia. That's what we got with him trying to spread democracy. We also got China's favored nation status. We got NAFTA because of this. It has more than just foreign policy implications. What we got, unfortunately, is the emerging world order. And I'm going to go to one book to really explain this. Like, what are you talking about? What is realism? Why is it different than neoliberalism and neoconservatism? Because realists view the world very differently. Realists view the world as, especially the modern nation-state system, is that you have nations basically trying, whether they're acting offensively or defensively, their goal is relative power for stability. Their goal is because we live in what is called an international state of anarchy. Yeah. There is no global 911. It's a great way to put it. It was first laid out that way, and everybody uses it. Mm-hmm. The UN is not a valid or legitimate institution. It has no teeth. So Ukraine cannot really run to the UN right now and call the global police to stop Russia. You may believe that's happening right now, but you'd be stupid to. There is no global police, which is why, if those of you who want to show your age, like me, if you're old enough to remember the 2000 campaign, that is why George W. Bush, a very different than the president George W. Bush, very different man, won New Hampshire and the presidency by running around saying we cannot be the world's police. And yet, that's exactly what he made us. People before him laid the foundation for it, including his daddy and Bill Clinton. And it was folly. Now, I can't go over the whole thing because it's really genius. There are things that I agree with and disagree with all of these authors I'm going to show you. E.H. Carr would have said, leave this alone. E.H. Carr would have said, because we meddled in affairs that they had no impact on us. Not really. You can couch the rhetoric and morality all you want, but the truth of the matter is your real goal is political power or ambition. And there was no gain from slaughtering millions of people in World War I. It would then lead to the Weimar Republic, which, by the way, was a punishment to Germany for World War I. And how did that work out? Inflation, which we're dealing with now. God forbid we ever get to the part of that republic where we're all pushing around dollar bills and wheelbarrows for a loaf of bread. But that's what the Allies did to Germany. And it paved the way for a man called Adolf Hitler. E.H. Carr would have argued that we created World War II. We did it. And it's probably time we'd start admitting it. All right? And they do this stuff with lies, which is a really big... Yeah. I tweeted, some of you are going to hear some of this because, I was tweeting it before, but I really want to elaborate on it. Every major conflict the U.S. has been involved in since the First World War has been premised on a lie, ladies and gentlemen. Total lie. The merchant ship, the British merchant ship, the Lusitania, was sunk on purpose to get isolationist Americans outraged enough to help the British. The Germans, and I brought this up, Michael Hunt, Crisis in U.S. Foreign Policy. Read the cables yourselves. Read them yourselves. This isn't some unpatriotic, blasphemous talk against the country. They did this. Mm-hmm. Woodrow Wilson wanted to help his Anglo friends because he was a racial supremacist, and he believed that the global order would be better if it was run by the Anglo-American white race. It's true. And they were told repeatedly, tell them to stop putting those merchant ships in our space, in our territory. And we're going to sink them. The German ambassador begged Wilson, don't do this because you're forcing us. We want to be friends with you, but you are forcing us to sink these ships. We know those are your goods on those ships, even though you claim to be neutral. Even though, by the way, we had laws of neutrality, ladies and gentlemen. They did this in many cases, either around the law or against the law. Roosevelt was very good at breaking the law to help Winston Churchill. So they sunk the Lusitania. He goes out there, trots out there, and says this is a war to save democracy. Total garbage. Proud of me? Total garbage. Orchestrated. And how many boys went over to another land they had never seen in their life and paid the ultimate price for it? For what? A global order that would lead to Adolf Hitler? Who, by the way, we're going to, again, a major theme here today, this talk of morality, moralism, what is right, good versus evil, it's bull crap. They, behind the scenes, will talk realpolitik. To you, they sell this bull crap. Like Adolf Hitler was a madman. Well, of course, Adolf Hitler wasn't sound in his mind. But Otto von Bismarck would have done the same thing Adolf Hitler did as far as offensive strategies. Germany was encircled by enemies. You spread out as a nation. Everyone would do it. Everybody. You spread out as a nation for security. Like Israel, after the 70s, decided this can't happen anymore. Like Israel decided, I don't want to be encircled by Arab enemies, so the next time they invade us or attack us, they don't have to make a very quick leap from their border into ours. We need a buffer to protect our citizens. Germany was doing the same damn thing, whether it's Otto von Bismarck or Adolf Hitler. That's why he wanted the Lorraine. Right now, Vladimir Putin is doing that very same thing. He's not encircled, but he has enemies all over his Western front. Enemies who are meddling in the countries with populations that identify as pan-Slavic. And I'm going to get more into the history of Ukraine, but this is from the West. Basically, Western elites wanting to westernize countries that don't want to be westernized. They want to artificially draw boundaries that were in place because of this idea of pan-Slavism, but they now wanted to not only expand those boundaries, but westernize them. And they just expect everybody to agree. And we're going to do a little thought exercise. Imagine if, and we're going to do some role playing, role reversing. And you see whether or not you think the U.S. or Russia is the aggressor here. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some of that. People who know me know I love this book. The Tragedy of Great Power Politics, John Mearsheimer. If you want to read something that's light, because some of these guys are not light, be honest. Somebody like Jack Snyder, right, Owen? If Owen's watching. Myths of Empire. You want to see some epic takedowns of neoconservatism. And he does it in a way that everybody can understand. All right? This one, though, nobody has been able to counter. The only real argument in realism is whether there are rooms for more expanded versions of realism. Like Donald Trump was a structural realist, I would say. All right. He called it principle realism, but he was nevertheless a realist. Or his doctrine that he laid out in the UN in his first year sounded like structural realism, but he acted more like John Mearsheimer, which in the end was good. Because for all those idiots out there talking about how somehow this is Donald Trump's fault, he did not invade Ukraine under Donald Trump. Your argument is completely nonsensical because Donald Trump was they viewed a bit of a loose cannon. They just couldn't get their hands around. For those who have not read those reports, I know one specifically with Xi Jinping, he used threats. He wanted these guys to think that he was a strong man, madman. He really did. So basically, you got to get him. Yeah, he's like running all over the camera. And he's adorable. He's happy to see his mom and dad. What can I tell you? He wanted people to think he was like a strong / madman. So he would tell Putin, if you take Ukraine, man, I'll obliterate Moscow. And Putin's like, what? Meanwhile, the media is like, they're friends. He's Putin's asset. This is the damage the media did to our country for 4 years. The lies, the damage, the intel lies, the foreign policy establishment lies that they just regurgitated is total nonsense and the absolute reverse of the truth. And Putin would scoff and say, man, shut up. And he's like, no, I'm serious, man. I'll reduce those golden little things you got to rubble, bro. He did that on purpose. He met with Xi Jinping, when he decided to, lob missiles at Syria. And he was like, yeah, oh, don't get up. I'm about to blast some tomahawks at Assad. More cake? That's what he would do. That was the president he was. And these guys would be like, whoa, what the hell is wrong with this guy? You know what? I kind of half believe that those golden turrets won't be there if I step out of line. I half believe this nutcase. They knew he wasn't to be trifled with. The media sold you a lie. He was a textbook realist. And we had not had a realist president ever. Ronald Reagan was close to a realist. Unfortunately, he had a lot, just like Trump, by the way. He had a lot of neocons in his orbit. And he also believed a lot of the neocon nonsense, like, arm the Contras, this go around Congress to do it, right? Because we can't have the domino effect, right, Jack Snyder? We can't have the domino effect. If South Korea falls, then it's going to keep going. If South Vietnam falls, then communists are just going to keep spreading. It spread to the Western Hemisphere anyway. We killed all of those people in Korea, including our own. We sent to die. We killed all of 50,000 young American lives in South Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia and North Vietnam, by the way, illegally. And yet it still spread. The domino effect was folly. All right. But I want to read this from John Mearsheimer, because when you hear the Max idiots of the world, Max Boots and the Bill Cristols and all the other tools about how Putin is this madman and Putin is evil and he wants to resurrect the evil Soviet Empire. Some of them are stupid and believe it, but the truth of the matter is they don't. They just hope you're dumb enough and you believe it. Because Americans dislike realpolitik, public discourse about foreign policy in the United States is usually couched in the language of liberalism. Hence, the pronouncements of the policy elites are heavily flavored with optimism and moralism. American academics are especially good at promoting liberal thinking in the marketplace of ideas. But behind closed doors, however, the elites who make national security policy speak mostly the language of power, not that of principle. And the United States acts in the international system according to the dictates of realist logic. In other words, the international state of anarchy. Pursuit of power for power's sake, whether it's defensive or offensive. In essence, a discernible gap separates public rhetoric from the actual conduct of American foreign policy. Prominent realists have often criticized U.S. diplomacy on the grounds that it is too idealistic, and have complained that American leaders pay insufficient attention to the balance of power. For example, George Kennan, and this matters because George Kennan, these idiots keep citing. And if George Kennan was still alive, he would tell them to shut up, that they are wrong. They have perverted his policies, molested his mind. He's the father of what had come to be known as the long telegraph. And it would essentially say that the Russians are strong and proud people, and you do not want to engage them in a one-on-one conflict, nor these proxy conflicts. Really, he would not have even argued for some of those proxy conflicts. We should engage instead in a Cold War with the confidence that we have a superior system of government and economy and freedom, the principles of liberty and the prospects of a free market will simply outwork them. They won't be able to keep up because leftism is inferior. Anyway, Keenan wrote in 1951, I see the most serious fault of our past policy formulation to lie in something that I might call the legalistic, moralistic approach to international problems. This approach runs like a red sky through our foreign policy of the last 50 years. According to this line of argument, there is no real gap between America's liberal rhetoric and its foreign policy behavior, because the United States practices what it preaches. But this claim is wrong. As I will argue at length below, American foreign policy has usually been guided by realist logic, although the public pronouncements of its leaders might lead one to think otherwise. Oh, and he's about to cite our buddy E.H. Carr. It should be obvious to intelligent observers that the U.S. speaks one way and acts another. In fact, policymakers in other states have always remarked about this tendency in American foreign policy. As long ago as 1939, E.H. Carr pointed out that states on the European continent regard the English-speaking people as, quote, masters in the art of concealing their selfish national interests in the guise of a general good, unquote, adding that, quote, this kind of hypocrisy is a special and characteristic peculiarity in the Anglo-Saxon mind, unquote. All right. So basically, the U.S. is no better than others. No better. And this constant idea of promoting democracy is a lie. It's not true. It doesn't hold up to empirical scrutiny. But worse, it's a lie. We have to westernize the Ukrainians who want to be Western. We're fighting for their ability to be independent and free. No, you're not. No, we're not. They're fighting for their ability to rape and pillage a weaker country. Somebody wrote in response to my claim that, and they're right, it's a honeypot for them. Which is why, by the way, there's one one area of structuralism that I think there is room in realism to adopt, which is that sometimes, depending on who really is like realists would say, it doesn't matter who's in charge of a nation, generally speaking, that they will act because human nature, going back to Morgenthau, who originally started realists, a very negative view of human nature, or a realistic view of human nature, where humans pursue power such that so it follows that governments, obviously occupied by human beings, will pursue power as well. I think that's a little bit basic, and so do others that came after him, but he started that basic idea. And there are people who have since done in with a lot of his underlying theories, but the central theory has not been challenged and will never be challenged. He was right. All right, so bottom line is, the bottom line is that you have something like Rwanda, right? We have all of these instances where we can look and we can say, like, where would it end? If this was real, if their rhetoric was really the motivation, then where would it end? Why didn't Bill Clinton do anything about Rwanda, right? Why didn't the global community do anything about some of these other genocides? Because it's not really true. There was no benefit for them in these countries. That was the key difference. It served no real politique interest to intervene on behalf of those people. So they just let it go. They just let it go. But there's a few other real quick things I want to go over. All right. Because we can't talk about what Russia's doing without understanding strategies to gain power. That nation state. And the name of the game is relative power. You're never going to have absolute power. Hegemony, which is the dominance of an area or region, obviously regional hegemony, is a goal, but not all nation states have to actually use it, because they could use other strategies, especially if they don't have the resources to get there. They can use other strategies to secure their security. All right, which people have been doing to the United States for a really long time, and we have been basically allowing it to happen. We want influence, so in exchange, we let others jump on our bandwagon, but we suffer. What we get, another missive empire, by the way, what we get is drained of our power and resource. They get security, we get drained. Our Western allies, NATO, is the United States. The old World War order, the allies in both World War I and World War II are extremely weak. It comes from us. We bleed it. And it's not, more times than not, it will never be in the interest of the superpower to do that. I mean, you could talk all of this nonsense on a panel all you want, like Jonah Goldberg and the rest. They are the ones who have consistently argued for these policies that have failed, the policy of failure, the foreign policy of failure, that have led us to be a weaker nation. While, by the way, a real threat rises. All right. Bottom line, right. And the second task, obviously, we have to, war is the main strategy for, and I'll just read it. War is the main strategy states employ to acquire relative power. Now, I'm not going to read the whole damn takedown here, but the bottom line is some people would argue that war is no longer cost efficient, so states wouldn't do it. But I mean, look what's happening right now. That's not true, right? Vladimir Putin obviously argued that it obviously decided that it was a net gain. For instance, in Germany, they conquered. If you can achieve a relatively easy victory, then it is in the best interest. That's why the longer the Ukrainians can hold out, because they're not going to get ground help from Western Europe. It's just not going to happen. They have to do this themselves. The longer this is protracted, the better chance that Ukrainians have against the Russian army. Now, Putin's demands were released earlier, and it does not appear he wants all of Ukraine. So, and by the way, Britt Hume, you were dead wrong. Read those demands. You were dead wrong, buddy. You don't buy the argument. It's about NATO and ensuring that Slavic people would not be part of NATO. Read the damn demands. Think he's joking? Clearly not. Anyway, so war still is the main strategy. However, it is a calculus. Blackmail is more attractive as an alternative because it relies on the threat of force, not the actual use of force, to produce results. Thus, it is relatively cost-free. Blackmail is usually difficult to achieve, however, because great powers are likely to fight before they are to submit to threats from other great powers. Russia. Another great strategy for gaining power is bait and bleed, whereby a state tries to weaken its rivals by provoking a long and costly war between them. North Vietnam, North Korea. But this scheme is also difficult to make work. It is true, although it's been successful. A more promising variant of the strategy is bloodletting, in which a state takes measures to ensure that any war in which an adversary is involved is protracted and deadly. So they did try one strategy and then leapt to the other. And they did so with the help of another superpower who sat back watching us make a fool of ourselves. Balancing and buck passing. This is very important. Are the principal strategies that great powers use to prevent aggressors from upsetting the balance of power. With balancing, threatened states seriously commit themselves to containing their dangerous opponent. In other words, they are willing to shoulder the burden of deterring, or fighting, if need be, the aggressor. With buck passing, they try to get another great power to check the aggressor, while they remain on the sidelines. Threatened states usually prefer buck passing to balancing, mainly because the buck passer avoids the cost of fighting the aggressor in the event of war. With Afghanistan, sound familiar? Anyway, appeasement and bandwagoning are also very, very important, but bandwagoning more so. All right. Bandwagoning is when, let me see if I get it. Bandwagoning is basically when other states, a threatened state, has basically abandoned hope of preventing an aggressor from gaining power at its expense. So it will essentially look for a stronger power to shoulder that burden. Okay. It will join a coalition to then engage in balancing. So, for instance, Ukraine cannot defend itself in an all-out ground war against Russia, which Russia has not launched, by the way. If it launched an all-out war, this probably would have been over. And he may. I mean, it depends. He's going to decide whether or not adding additional troops is beneficial to him. We'll see. But essentially, we have to look back to find out what's going on now with the Cold War. George Kennan, if he was still alive, when the Soviet Union fell, when the USSR dissolved, he would absolutely have told U.S. foreign policymakers to dissolve NATO. That if you really want peace with whatever emerges out of the USSR, you have to dissolve NATO, because Russians, the type of people they are, but really any nation state, would look at an existing balancing coalition as an aggressor. NATO was to balance against the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact has dissolved. It's over. It's gone. Since then, NATO has done nothing but try to expand its influence and its membership in an hemisphere where the major partner in NATO doesn't belong. You could say it's about our Western allies, but I'm telling you that's bogus. NATO is a very small part, the Western allies, which was Donald Trump's main problem. We are NATO. The U.S. is NATO. If the roles were reversed, and by the way, E.H. Carr would say, let it go. Let it go. It is not worth a great power conflict for your fake moralism. Let it go. People, real people, not you, will have to go and fight a bloody and protracted war. Let's play the Imagine If game for 1 second before we get into the next work here. Imagine if the United States lost the Cold War. NATO disbanded, and Russia did not disband the Warsaw Pact. Instead, the Warsaw Pact continued to move west into our Western allies' territory over 30 years, continued to exert influence, and then all of a sudden, because of course Russia is still, like we are, the primary member of NATO, the primary strength behind NATO, Russia, the primary strength behind Warsaw, the Warsaw Pact starts popping up in the Western Hemisphere. Cuba becomes part of the Warsaw Pact. Argentina. Then parts of Mexico, because they're leftist, right? And all of these areas, Brazil was once leftist. Chile. Pope Francis is Argentina. He was born out of leftist ideology. And it pops up to our south. And then it starts popping up with people who identify as Western European nation states. Alberta, a rather conservative area outside Alberta and in and around Alberta. These are people who came, obviously, from Europe, France, English to a lesser extent. And the Warsaw Pact just starts gobbling up Alberta. Butts right up against Niagara Falls. The people of New York, and then worse, you have parts of Maine where some of the people are like, look, I'm Quebecois. Who would be the aggressor in your mind? If we started to fight back, if we launched 100,000 troops, 130, 150,000 troops on the border near Niagara Falls, tanks coming up the railroad, because we're trying to push back. We now have Putin and the USSR not only in our own hemisphere with the Warsaw Pact, but now they are actually right up against our border. And they are annexing areas. They're trying to easternize Alberta. Would we be the aggressors if we decided to liberate Alberta? Would we? The biggest, all of these guys don't agree. I mean, some of them, they agree on general principles, but then all of the minutiae of their own arguments and their own versions of their school, they start to really disagree with each other. And that's great. That's what it's all about. But one thing that generally everyone agrees on is that the biggest blunders in U.S. foreign policy in the 20th and 21st centuries have come from our inability to see other nations as we see ourselves in the international state of anarchy. And the public gets duped by these moralistic, these argues of virtue, defenders of democracy, these lies. Because Americans are instinctively anti-war. It's a knee-jerk anti-interventionist mindset. They immediately say, no, I don't want no part of it. I got my own problems. We're on our own continent, basically, all the way over here. That would all change, by the way, if Russians were annexing Alberta or Niagara Falls, parts of Maine, parts of New York. That would all change real quick. Started to move in maybe to New Hampshire. And worse, they actually started buying some of our elites. So some of our elites wanted to westernize. This is the equivalent if you are able to put yourself in another person's shoes, another nation state's shoes. The biggest blunders have come from our inability. And what I mean by our, the people. They can't do this without your okay or your compliance or your complacency. Eventually, for the large part, I'm sorry, the public was duped. The public was duped over the Lusitania. The public was duped over Pearl Harbor. Our inability not to see what Roosevelt had backed the Japanese into a corner. This society would not have been able to survive if that embargo continued. Steel, other precious metals, oil, timber. Their nation state would have come grinding to a halt. He did it on purpose because he wanted us in the war. Did he know that it would specifically be Pearl Harbor? No, but it was on the top list of where they probably could attack. They were expecting an attack. He backed them in the corner on purpose. And the public was lied into another war. The domino effect, which was ultimately behind both Korea and Vietnam, was a lie. It was not true. And by the way, there was a specific lie to get us into the Vietnam War, the Gulf of Tonkin incident. And it never ends. Throwing babies out of incubators. We have to go liberate Kuwait. Try for a moment to put yourself in Saddam Hussein's shoes. The real truth was that Kuwait was using technology to drill underneath the ground across Iraq's border. This is a tiny little nation with immense wealth, greedy as hell, does not share our Western values. But yet we had to go liberate the Kuwaiti people. And the horrible Iraqi army was dumping babies. Babies! That was a lie. Babies in incubators. That woman was the daughter of a certain somebody, and that was a complete act. Liberate Kuwait. Freaking kidding me? No. Control the oil supply. Do not allow what we viewed to be an enemy to have control over the oil. That was even a stretch in and of itself, because all Saddam Hussein wanted was for Kuwait not to steal his oil. Kuwait was stealing his oil. You heard a completely different story. The babies in the incubator single-handedly changed the course of public opinion. Single-handedly! Americans were over 2-1 opposed to using military force to liberate Kuwait before that fake-ass story was pushed on you. Americans also, too, even after 9/11, largely only supported Afghanistan. The idea of going into Iraq was a hard sell, not only to the American people, but to the international community. So much so that the very moral and virtuous Colin Powell, late great, the hero of the liberation of Kuwait and the architect of the left hook, goes to the UN, lies his ass off, and in case the lie didn't work, he had the U.S. intelligence community and their buddies in the United Kingdom spying on our friends, hoping to catch them, I don't know, like one with a 16-year-old prostitute, the other one sniffing a line, whatever, whatever works. And if it wasn't for Catherine, we wouldn't even know that. The whistleblower for British intelligence. If it wasn't for her, we wouldn't even know that. And she did that at great personal risk to herself, almost ended up in jail for the rest of her life. They dropped the case only out of embarrassment. And that's the only reason why we know about that. Otherwise, we would have just known about Colin Powell's lie. But in case that lie didn't sell, look at the anthrax here. Look at the WMDs over here. Disgusting behavior. Disgusting. And of course, it was a total lie. Total lie. Yes, there were some chemical weapons that went into Syria, but that's not what you were told, ladies and gentlemen. You were told stories, fantastical stories about yellow cake. Saddam tried to grab, yes, there we got him. Saddam right here, trying to obtain some yellow cake. He's going to put it in a dirty bomb and drop it in the capital. He's going to put it in a dirty bomb and he's going to drop it. We don't know. It could be New York. Maybe you got enough yellow cake to bomb New York, D.C., and every other metro area in the United States. Folks, unless you lived through it, you don't remember it. If you did live through it, you remember. And for those of us, actually, who were in the army at the time, we're like, what are you talking about? We're going to invade Iraq. I thought the terrorists were in Afghanistan. Well, what do I know? I'm just an enlisted guy. We follow orders. The brass has always been a bunch of liars, including the very disgusting lie that somehow Al-Qaeda killed Pat Tillman. So get your guns. We're about to get hardcore on them. We got a green light to do things, men, that we're not supposed to normally do. Got a green light on that. Of course, that was a lie. We killed Pat Tillman. The democratic peace theory, which I want to return to in a little bit before I want to continue the lies. Even Muammar Gaddafi. And I got to give a little bit of credit to Barack Obama because, in fact, he really didn't want to give Hillary Clinton the green light. He hated Sidney Blumenthal. And he knew that this conflict in Libya had absolutely nothing to do with Muammar Gaddafi being some kind of madman or not cracking down on fundamentalist Islam, not failing to cooperate with the agreement under the Bush administration for WMDs and other weapon systems. No. He was doing all of that. He wasn't a madman oppressing his people in the sense that they said. That's just not true. Another reason why they can't stand Julian Assange is because he helped expose some of these lies. What I'm telling you right now is absolutely true. They don't care about moralism, folks. They didn't care about how Muammar Gaddafi ran his country. Hillary Clinton had a two-pronged objective. One, keep my friends happy, because Sidney Blumenthal and his friends were essentially banned by Muammar Gaddafi doing business and doing anything with Libyan oil or energy markets. And Hillary Clinton's friends who helped get her, as Secretary of State, and believed they would get her to be president, wanted those markets, access to those markets. And Barack Obama knew that. So he was very hesitant about it. But in the end, he buckled like a small little coward, and he let Hillary Clinton destabilize the nation for personal greed and ambition. Hillary Clinton wanted to make, as we know from her campaign emails, and we know that that's true from the State Department emails, that Muammar Gaddafi was complying and in fact begging for help. While the U.S. intelligence agencies were destabilizing his nation, he was complying with every single demand made by the Bush administration in that deal, and he was begging for humanitarian aid for his own people. But they didn't want to give it to him because they wanted the people to starve. They wanted the people to lack medicine, and they wanted them to take it out on Muammar Gaddafi. We came, we saw, he died. That's evil, ladies and gentlemen. It's just not foreign policy stupidity. That's an evil woman. Nasty woman, as Donald Trump said. In the end, too, they wanted to try to make Libya a democracy. They wanted to make Iraq a democracy. They wanted to make Afghanistan a democracy. And on and on and on and on. However, these just keep failing. And it wouldn't amount to anything anyway. The democratic peace theory is built on the premises that democracies can be more certain of each other's intentions and that those intentions are generally benign. Thus, they do not fight among themselves. If all the great powers were democracy, then each could be certain that the others had friendly intentions, and thus they would have no need to compete for power or prepare for major war. Since democracy appears to be spreading across the globe, it is reasonable to think that the world will eventually become one giant zone of peace. He's outlining what people think. As challenges to realism go, democratic peace theory is among the strongest. Still, serious problems that ultimately make it unconvincing. The theory's proponents maintain that the available evidence shows that democracies do not fight other democracies. But again, like I said, in order to do that, Bruce Russert had to change each definition of what a conflict is. Okay? The theory's proponents maintain the availability of evidence, blah, 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 but scholars who have examined the historical record dispute. Perhaps the most telling evidence against the theory is Christopher Lane's careful analysis of 4 crises in which rival democracies almost always went to war with each other. When one looked at how the decision not to fight was reached in each case, the fact that both sides were democracies appear to have mattered little. Thus, there certainly is no evidence that the rival democracies had benign intentions toward one another. In fact, the outcome each time was largely determined by balance of power considerations. Another reason to doubt democratic peace theory is the problem of backsliding. No democracy can be sure that another democracy will not someday become an authoritarian state. Canada, the US, Australia. I mean, how could you say that we're going to promote each other's intentions and values when we don't live up to them ourselves? In which case, the remaining democracy would no longer be safe and secure. Prudence dictates that democracies prepare for that eventuality, which means striving to have as much power as possible, just in case a friendly neighbor turns into a neighborhood bully. But even if one rejects these criticisms and embraces democratic peace theory, it is still unlikely that all the great powers in the system will become democratic and stay that way over the long term. It would only take a non-democratic China or Russia to keep power politics in play, and both of those states are likely to be non-democratic for at least part of the 21st century. And by the way, he's making a prediction here. We are now in the year 2022. We are damn more than 1/5 out of this century. Do you see any suggestion that the CCP is weakening? Does any event, data point, anything indicate to you that the communists are on the decline in China? And sure as hell does not look that way with Putin and the oligarchs. The West can cry all they want about how these sanctions are going to hurt the oligarchs. Folks, they have already taken these stupid sanctions into consideration. Donald Trump's sanctions, which Joe Biden removed, hurt Putin with the oligarchs far worse than anything Mark Warner and Joe Biden are trying to put together with our allies now. Nothing has to do with energy. We're not able to leverage our energy independence because Joe Biden squandered our energy independence. So that card is off the table. The one and only card that could truly, really hurt Vladimir Putin. So we have I don't want to say no hope, but there is hope. The hope is in acknowledging the world as it is and creating policy in accordance with that reality. The solution, and there is no hope in the solution that we just continue this way. The Biden administration sounds like the Bush administration pre-Iraq war. We're going backward. Backward. We are not learning. We're not progressing. We're regressing. We invaded a country for a family's personal interests. Now we want to defend a country, only this one's even worse because this one pegs us up against a great power. Now we are doing so for what? The personal interests of another president and his family. You'll pay $10, but don't worry, Hunter Biden's going to make a lot more money. You'll pay $10 at the pump, but don't worry, Hunter Biden's going to get another chair job. And by the way, I skipped over the strategies to pursue power. Where is our next balancing coalition coming from? We're pushing the two other great powers into each other's arms. We're going to rely, listen, I'm not trying to slam anybody's nation. I'm just telling the truth here. We're going to rely on the weaklings in France who just got steamrolled in both world wars. We're going to rely on Great Britain to be our other superpower to balance against the horrifying prospect of a China-Russian alliance. This is madness and stupidity. If you were intentionally trying to destroy the supremacy of U.S. power forget about globally, in our own damn hemisphere, that is what you would do. The good call here was Trump's call to be friendly but stern with Russia. Let him think that will reduce Moscow to rubble if he takes Ukraine. It obviously worked. It did not happen. Use our energy independence, which Biden squandered, as real leverage, but be friendly, like George Kennan said. Friendly competitors. China is the threat. Maybe let's unchain some allies that actually could be effective, but because we're still living in the Soviet scare era of foreign policy, we're living in the post-World War II order as if it's still relevant. We can't do it. We can't let Germany be strong again. They won't let it happen. The single most effective nation who, by the way, what Russia and China in combat, in great power conflict, which is Japan, has essentially been double shackled because of the Second World War. The U.S. is pledged to defend the Japanese, a people who have thousands of years of warrior spirit and are now our allies, and also happen to hate China's guts. A feud that predates the United States of America. They once kicked Russia's, you know what, and kicked China's, you know what. We had to nuke them twice to get them to surrender. But instead, no. We let them sit on the sidelines. By the way, Russia's making nicey nice with India. So that ally, they love Donald Trump. They can't stand Joe Biden. So that alliance is now real shaky. A détente with Russia, an alliance with India, and a more aggressive Japan who could defend themselves is the course of action here to confront China. Because otherwise, this is going to take over and we're going to lose. Dale Copeland, The Origins of Major War. I don't agree with everything he wrote, but generally the concept that great powers, while one is on the decline and the other one is on the ascension, tend to war with each other because the falling great power becomes, how is the word I'm looking for without insulting anybody? Insecure. But here's the problem. When you look at it historically, and again, also great book for mathematical view of foreign policy. When you look at it, the great power that's declining always engages too late. They always, and typically internal sabotage. But generally speaking, by the time they realize they have to engage, it's too damn late. So they lose. And that's how a hegemon is replaced. So, not that I'm trying to give everybody a dark version of this. But I'm just saying this is simply the reality. And our foreign policy establishment has been living in these fantasy theories for years. They're so deluded. Like I said, they're so deluded. I hear neocons citing George Kennan. Or Kennan, however you pronounce it. Heard it both ways. He would absolutely hate them. He would view them as dangerous. Neoliberals, same damn thing. E.H. Carr would say we're doomed. E.H. Carr would say we're doomed because we have lost our ability to view like foreign policy through the cost-benefit analysis that later is greatly articulated by John Mearsheimer. Like, sometimes states make miscalculations, but they're still trying to calculate whether one strategy will have a net benefit or not. E.H. Carr would probably, if he was alive today, would say, well, first of all, the history tells us the U.S. has made some very serious mistakes that have led to global wars and the death of millions. So we already were not inclined to do it. Unfortunately, the people were, but the politicians lied to them and the people got duped. Now, I would think he would, if he was alive, not to put words in the dead man's mouth, but I think he would say we've completely lost the ability to look at a foreign policy situation and say, okay, this is vital, this is not. This will do damage to our long-term position in the international state of anarchy. Our relative power will decline by taking this position. Eventually, we'll be faced with this kind of a situation. And again, I know, I don't know if Owen's listening right now. Only one I know, Owen bought this and started reading it. He just has a field day with these idiots. He just has a field day with them. And he does it in a way which is really easy, but to understand. So I like to tell people a lot to read that. But when we come back, we're going to talk more about imagined communities and what the history of Ukraine. And why my comparison to, let's say, Canada, if the roles were reversed, is rather accurate. And I actually think it's worse in the case of Russia. And by the way, questioning foolish policy. I'm going to pull back. Sometimes curse words just seem appropriate because of the level of stupidity. But foolish policies, speaking out against them is the highest form of patriotism. So for those who keep lobbing stupidity at others who disagree with this, like, you know what, get on our side or get on Putin's side. You sound like the morons who believed George Bush. We either fight them over there or we fight them over here. You're either with us or you're against us. You're literally stealing words from the Bush administration. You hated that man. A man the left once accused of war crimes. is now somehow your inspiration? Talk about intellectual dishonesty at its finest. At its finest. By the way, while I take a real quick break, I'll leave you with a little bit of homework. Why doesn't China do this? Why doesn't China view these conflicts and interventions in their best interest? They're clearly rising and gaining relative power, but they have not employed these tactics. 2 minutes and 30 seconds while we go to the break to try to think about, have they done the math, and have they decided that it's foolish? All right. You're watching Inside the Numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit again. But I once had a blooper where I did that, and I think it's on Locals. Speaking of which, sign up on Rumble. It's one of those plus signs. And then subscribe right over there at the button to the Locals community, peoplespundit.locals.com. 2 minutes, 30-second break. We'll be back.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. There's rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love. Because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
Take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to disappear for a night, just to give in to the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
All right, we're back inside the numbers with the People's Pundit. I'm your host, Rich Barris, the People's Pundit. So listen, I really forgot to mention before the break, the reason why we're pushing all this, more than just censorship too, you're signing up to Rumble and everything. Eventually, I do want Rumble to be dominant. I know they're working on some things and they'll get there, but definitely I'm imploring people to sign up on Rumble. And then, of course, sign up to the peoplespundit.locals.com community, because the bigger the community grows, and we had some nice growth last week, the bigger the community grows, the better the coverage in the 2022 elections will be. It's really as simple as that. All right. And I could lob a number at you. I don't know, though. They'd probably be pretty mad. But the cost of the coverage is a lot. All right. And I know I'm getting yelled at for the public polling project. I'll get you the link today. Laura, remind me. as soon as the show is over to get the new link up, because people are like, we could have been pulling this, we could have been pulling that. You're right, and I'll get it up. It's still up right now for the old one, and I will push the other stuff over. I'll push new contributions to the new project, but I do like to go project to project to project, because then that leaves me doing some math I don't necessarily want to do, because everything has to be completely above board and transparent. All right. But definitely, if you want to see solid coverage, I'm telling you, the growth of the community is going to generate that. All right. So sign up to locals, become a member. When we do have polls, you'll get exclusive content, you'll get early content, and you do anyway. Right. So we got some new redistricting maps that we were waiting on. Some of that is being signed for North Carolina again. 3 judges decided they know better than the legislature. Ohio too, Florida now, that seems to be, that's a go. So I can actually start printing out those maps and showing you the difference and changes, especially with ones that are competitive. All right. Because of course that's what matters coming 2022, isn't it? Social constructivists, by the way, are another school that I should probably give some talk to real quick before we get into questions, because I want to get into the history of Ukraine and questions. All right. They basically say that realists look at the world from a too materialistic point of view, and that generally we are, you know what? They maintain that states behave towards each other and each other is not a function of how the material world is structured, as realists believe, but instead is largely determined by how individuals think and talk about international politics. And there goes on. I could really, say some other stuff here, but there's a problem. A major problem with this. They point to the fall of the Soviet Union as a great triumph in this. What's going on right now? This is why it's always important. International relations is great, because we can argue theories, but then events will happen to disprove people. And social constructivists are taking a hit as we speak. Realists would say, look, the last 7 centuries or more, we can even go back to antiquity, has been dominated by realism, the dictates of realism. You can't dispute that. You don't dispute that. What you're saying is we can try to change it. It's our behaviors and our actions. The UN, right? We can end the problem of the global 911 call, but we can't, can we? So until when this book was written anyway, and when others' books were written that I've showed you, they would argue that's stupid and just, idealistic and rather naive, because of what has happened over the better part of 1,000 years. Now, you lose. It failed. It is failing right now. So modify your thinking. I don't know what to tell you. Modify your thinking. All right, so also, to the fall of the Soviet Union, they'll point to how a bunch of Westerners in, Western intellectuals had convinced Gorbachev to implement internal changes like perestroika to essentially sabotage the Soviet system, right? There's a real issue with that in and of itself, all right, which the bottom line is that's a very anti-Reagan intellectual world view and argument. It's not one that is, definitive. It doesn't you don't want to give credit to Ronald Reagan in the buildup. The system was failing. Ronald Reagan kind of took a note from George Kennan and saw it, and said, let's have faith in our system that we can outcompete them, because states react to each other. So if we build up, they will try in an effort to hold on to at least keep the status quo of relative power, the balance of power. In order to keep that status quo, they will have to try to match that, and they won't be able to. This is why most realists will give most of the credit to Reagan, whereas liberals and others want to talk about Gorbachev. The truth is, yeah, I would give credit to both, but still, I definitely am a realist, and the fact is, they decided, Gorbachev or no Gorbachev, that they needed to keep that status quo. And they harmed themselves by doing it because they could not keep up, and they burned themselves out. Right? They chased the status quo to death. And the reason why you hear so much nonsense about it is because people don't want to give Reagan that credit. They don't. And that's sad, because you should be looking at this objectively. All right, let's move on to one and on to another. Ukraine, the history of Ukraine. All right. Yes, it is true that the Russians themselves created the boundaries of Ukraine, what was first known as Ukraine. But after the death of Stalin, all right, it actually changed, included other territories that are now the contested areas, the real territories that are causing this problem. Crimea, the Donbass, right? All of these areas that now Putin wants back. And the West will tell you he's trying to recreate the Soviet Union, right? But the West came in after, in 1991, the West came in and looked at the territories of Ukraine. They created the modern Ukraine because of this. They decided that everything was just going to Westernize. They refused to recognize that, especially the later added territories, but all of Ukraine, but especially the later added territories, really believed in Pan-Slavic, the Pan-Slavism. They identify as Slavic. They do not identify as Western. One of the more valid polls conducted in Eastern Europe, especially Ukraine, just a few weeks ago, when asked, showed a split Ukraine over whether or not they want to be more Western, or they would rather be considered part of Russia. The country was split almost evenly. And when I say reliable polls, I'm not saying they don't skew to the West. They do. But it was 52-48. A 4-point pro-West lead. Well within the damn sampling error. It's a joke. And yet our leaders and other Western elites go out there and say, the Ukrainians are fighting the Russians with everything they got to prevent them from being annexed by Russia or conquered by Russia. Who are those Ukrainians? The Ukrainian army? Funded by the United States of America? Well, of course they are. What about the people? And by the way, the atrocities committed by the Ukrainian army is one of the main reasons why not just people of Russia, but the people who identify with Russia almost view the dissolution of that army as a must. They view them as a puppet for the West and committers of war crimes. You never hear that side of the story. To hear Kamala Harris and Joe Biden say, talk of it, these are, holy warriors. Holy warriors for freedom. It's a load of crap. And that's not, listen, I'm not minimizing at all the bravery that we're seeing in some of these acts with these Ukrainians. I'm simply saying that it's very hard to find a good guy in Ukraine. That's why it's so difficult, and was so difficult during the Trump impeachment trial, all of that, to determine who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. Because the truth is, it's usually just bad guy versus worse guy. Ukraine is a deeply flawed and corrupt country. It doesn't know where it stands. And people told me in response to some of the comments, well then, if what you're saying is true, then there really is no hope for Ukraine in the end. And the only way is for it to remain like Switzerland, basically neutral. My response to that is, that's our fault. Who the hell gave us the right to basically impose a national identity on a group of rather diverse people who have two different mindsets? Is Ukraine a real nation state in a post-Soviet era? Is it even a real nation state? As determined by people like Benedict Anderson and others in National Identities, which is over there. I should have ran and grabbed it during the break. What constitutes a nation? Is it just simply borders, language, culture? Or is it something more? And the truth is, Benedict Anderson would say Ukraine's not even a nation. Not really. Not in this modern world. Where's the shared glory? Where's the shared suffering? Where's the shared identity that is a glue that holds this nation together? We moved in to what was once a dominant Slavic and pro-Slavic country in the post-Cold War era. And we decided it was going to westernize. Some people bought into that idea. Mainly elites who were crooked, who were okay with allowing the West to plunder and rape their country of its resources as long as they would get their own oligarchical structure, which they did, leaving half the damn country behind as the other. Have we forgotten that a pro-Russian government was overthrown by a CIA operation, installed a Western government, which never really had. Now, Zelensky won in a landslide, but Zelensky won in a landslide for a totally different reason. It had nothing to do with Westernization. In fact, Zelensky won on an anti-corruption platform. Zelensky's not a politician. He's basically a jokester. Very pro-Trump. Very pro-Trump worldview. Terrified when Trump left office that his country would go back to what it was, which is what led him to victory. They, meaning the people of Ukraine, elected Zelensky because they were sick of the Western puppets. This is the truth, which you did not hear during the impeachment. They were sick of the Obama and Biden cabal. And by extension, the embassy in Kiev reaching out, being their vehicle to influence domestic policy. They were sick of their meddling and corruption. It's amazing how Joe Biden, supposedly extorted $2 million out of Petro Poroshenko, telling Poroshenko, you will fire Viktor Shokin, the prosecutor general, unless they drop this investigation into my son. They called Viktor Shokin corrupt. And if you listen to the video, which is now the infamous video of Biden admitting this to the Council on Foreign Relations, he said, we had to install a good guy. Yuri Lutsenko is the man he's referring to. During the impeachment trial, Yuri Lutsenko wanted to come to the United States and tell his story about the Obama and Biden team cabal and how they corruptly meddled in Ukraine's affairs. Lutsenko had no experience like Viktor Shokin to run that job. He was not, a prosecutor. He was a puppet installed, unknown to him at the time. He was a puppet installed to prosecute people the U.S. wanted prosecuted and to drop the prosecutions of the people the U.S. did not want prosecuted. The star witness during the impeachment, remember, is a cutthroat, horribly corrupt woman. And they could not stand Kiev meddling in their affairs anymore. Who the hell are you to tell us who our prosecutor general is supposed to be? And why are these crooked pro-Western elites like Petro Poroshenko, who were installed after the pro-Russian government was toppled, why are they taking blackmail money and basically doing the bidding of the West? And that's why Zelensky whooped the pro-Obama, pro-Biden, Democrat. Adam Schiff, by the way, another one, strong ties to those oligarchs, fundraisers and all, Adam. Zelensky beat them. And those people were then heralded as the heroes during impeachment. Then when Lutsenko said, I want to come to the United States and testify that what Donald Trump is saying about Biden is true. They wouldn't let him come, and he turned into the bad guy. And somehow, he's just another corrupt idiot. Somehow, Biden they got away with this. Biden was able to say that I didn't fire him because he was investigating my son, Victor Shokin. I didn't fire him because he was investigating my son. I didn't demand that to happen. I did it because he was corrupt and we had to put a good guy in there. That good guy was Yuri Lutsenko. But then somehow they were able to get away with him making that argument as an excuse, while at the same time during impeachment saying he was a bad guy. It's unbelievable. They relied on the ignorance that Americans have to the internal politics of not just Ukraine, but specifically Kiev and its impact on it. They relied on their ignorance to the players in that game. All the while, by the way, the people who are behind all of this corruption are testifying like they're the rooters, outers of corruption. It was unbelievably dishonest. Complete Twilight Zone type of crap. Constructed fabrication. So that is the recent history of Ukraine, let alone, the expanding of the borders after the death of Stalin and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991. You can't come, right? Because really, why Zelensky won in such a landslide is that both the pro-Russian Ukrainians and the anti-West pro-Russian and the pro-West anti-Russian both had their own reasons to want the corruption to stop. So he won in a landslide, even though Zelensky was overwhelmingly, like a pro-Trump ally. And Benedict Anderson would say this is all just crazy. After the fall of the Soviet Union, these people have nothing almost in common anymore. And the West did it. The West thought they were going... These communities, why he calls it imagined communities, because they say they are imagined, but they are real nonetheless. So some things that we like to think about as a nation that are, tangible and material, that define a nation, yeah, they're important, but that's not the gist of it, Benedict Anderson argues, rightfully. I mean, he's basically the academic authority on nations. There's something else that happens there where a people become an identity. And yes, while it is imagined, it is nonetheless real. It becomes real. And that's really the juicy stuff when it comes to what makes a nation. And he would argue during the Soviet era, then sure. But once the West came in and tried to fabricate what is this is an organic thing that happens. You can't do it unnaturally. People do it. These communities do it. Which obviously communities turn into nations. It is not, it's not superficial. It's not in a natural occurrence. This is a natural occurrence. So the West cannot come in and say, okay, yes, relatively the same borders, although we're going to shift out some of those eastern areas. You're Ukraine, and you're now pro-West. You can't do that. You can't force people to change their identity. It doesn't matter if the Cold War is over. You can't do it. And then they declared it's independent, but it's not really, right? Not really. They got a lot of energy there. You're not really independent. And they tried to exert their influence on it. When they lost control of it, they decided to, wage a coup, which they did successfully. It's unbelievable. Now, so in a sense, again, we have created this problem. All right, let's take, I saw Laura really grabbing some really good questions. I see somebody's asking me about Huntington. Sam, good old Sam. So I generally do like Clash of Civilizations. I think it is a seminal work. And this is Mandate Freedom's question. I do find some, like, because I'm a realist, I do find some flaws absolutely with it. But I think that it's trying to straddle the worlds of, structural realism and almost like a constructivist. I think that, and I do think constructivist, which is, by the way, this is another fantastic book. All right. Honestly, I didn't think this theory had any value whatsoever until Martha Finnemore wrote this book. And for those who can't see it, it's National Interest in International Society. What she's trying to say is that national interests obviously do play a role. How much so to be determined, but we shouldn't ignore that. And I think you could really put, Sam in that category, trying to say that really there are national things going on. I just, in the end, I do see some flaws with it. I just can't deny his argument that this idealistic and, again, naive view, like from Barack Obama and others, that it's only, 99% of Muslims are peaceful and the rest, generally share our values. No, they don't. And by the way, 99% is not peaceful, are not peaceful. We have data from Pew Research and more. That's ridiculous. That's a total lie. And anyone who's visited Afghanistan, pre or post invasion or during occupation, that's a load of crap. People who wanted to westernize in Afghanistan were the minority. So much so that people were we brought in during the evacuation just to look like we were doing something, absolutely are going to, and have already started to, cause problems. Because they're not Western and they have no intention of being Western. So I do obviously see Sam's argument. I do. I just think that from an international relations standpoint, things may, when there was a bigger, more dominant Muslim nation, like where we have a great power or something, then maybe we will see that. But for the time being, this is some of the problems with his argument. Like powers that have risen that have been not great, but strong powers like Egypt, for instance. They have a big army. Go look at the largest armies in the world, and you will see Egypt is right up there. They have, some of them have clearly shown that they will bend to Western, I won't say interest, but for the right price, they'll put down the more radical elements, or not even radical. They'll put down the more, it's mainstream. Can we be real here? They'll put down the more mainstream view of Islam, at least in their foreign policy. They can't do it in society, but at least they will take that influence out of their nation state's foreign policy. And Gaddafi did the same thing, by the way. Gaddafi had some radical views when he was younger, but he made good on all of those promises to George W. Bush. He went after Wahhabism and even radical Sunnis. He did it. And generally, we haven't seen a great power that is of Muslim dominance that have like waged war on the West. Now, you could argue ISIS, would have, if Donald Trump didn't come along and wipe ISIS off the map, and like, let's say Hillary Clinton or, did basically a third term of Barack Obama. Now, ISIS could have really been Sam Huntington's prophecy. Really could have. Because the populations in these nations, if we're being honest with ourselves, do not necessarily disagree with the end game ISIS had laid out. So that's why I see some value in his argument. It's just that we haven't gotten there yet. And he may be, honestly, in 50 years, who knows? He may be proven ultimately to have been the wisest of us all. But we don't know. We don't know yet. Let me just, give me 1 second, and let me just don't go anywhere. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna kill this thing that's in. Was absolutely driving me nuts. Could you guys hear that in the background? Look. When they get older, you miss all the cartoons, right? You do. When you get older, you miss all the cartoons, and the songs and whatnot. And I love singing with my son. You know, I'm a goofy dad for sure. But after a while, when trying to be serious, it's like, you know, no more monkeys jumping on the bed. Come on, I can't do this over and over. All right, let's see. Yeah, where's the morality of the drug wars in Oakland? Mike Hart says. Dead kids from drug wars in Oakland every day. Crickets. Where's the morality now? Right. You want a moral outrage? Where's the moral outrage over China poisoning our population with fentanyl? Where's the outrage over the invasion at the southern border, which brings drugs, prostitution, human trafficking? And they only want to talk about dreamers who are now 35, 40 years old. They don't want to talk about the realities of immigration, illegal immigration. So we have to defend Ukraine's border while ours is open? What does Kamala Harris do over there? Sabotage the United States? Is that her job description? Her last job was being in charge of the border. She opened it. Now her job is being in charge of securing Ukraine's. This is nuts. We really have corrupt and unserious people running our country. And we have all of the idiot columnists in the Washington Post and the New York Times doing their bidding. They're not serious foreign policy scholars. Bill Kristol, Jonah Goldberg, Max Boot. These are all people and more who claim to have foreign policy chops. They're not scholars. They've never written a serious scholarly work in the field. They're mocked in the classrooms. Yet this is one thing that all of them agree with, whether they're constructivist, they're from constructivism, or they're realism. They all tend to agree that our foreign policy is run by people who don't understand how foreign policy really works. They don't, and it's sad. Let's see. Yeah, it's theater. Taiwan, Ukraine. Let's just build good stuff and sell it to the strongest. Thomas Jefferson liked that the best. I am 100% Laura knows this. I am like a Jeffersonian realist. I'm like blending it together. Which I think, by the way, Donald Trump did well. And it takes time had he had a second term, Donald Trump would have made us much stronger. And I say that without a doubt, because the only people in Washington, D.C. or in government who really looked at the pandemic and said, see, this is what ultimately can do us in. These industries now need to be looked at as national security issues. And we cannot rely on enemies who unleash deadly pathogens on the world to protect us from those pathogens. And Trump always knew when it came to trade and when it came to Taiwan, he always knew, he's a realist and he knew what was at stake there and what was, he knew what the real time was. And people always said Donald Trump was a madman. He's going to get us started with this war. He's Putin's puppet. Nothing could have been further from the truth. The man was a calculated madman. Putin, Kim Jong-un, Xi Jinping, they never really could tell when Donald Trump was serious or not, when he was making a joke or not. And they did know, damn, this guy, the United States finally has a president who openly speaks realpolitik. That's a problem. He is under no delusion that we are friendly competitors. He will not thrust a delusion on his people that any of these foolish actions are done in the name of morality and human rights or something like that. He's not doing it. That's a dangerous guy. And clearly it worked, didn't it? All these idiots, these columnists, the idiot words, stupid words coming up a lot because that's really what it comes down to. And then others are just blatantly corrupt. So even if they knew the truth or understood the truth. They wouldn't care. They wouldn't want to hear it. They just don't care. And by the way, the new maps in Pennsylvania have just been approved yesterday. That's another one somebody banged at me. And my database just told me that it was done running. So I'll throw that up too when I get a chance on locals. So generally speaking, some of these people are just stupid. I mean, how could you still be a neocon after the Iraq War? Do I really have to pull up the video archives of Bill Kristol and Jonah Goldberg and even the late Charles Krauthammer? Do I really have to pull this stuff up? We all know what these people said. Bill Kristol wasn't going to be in Vietnam. This war will be over in 2 months. Jack Snyder, absolutely, 100%. That's his purview all day, man. What a bunch of fools people like Bill Kristol and Jonah Goldberg are. The myths of empire. Keep chasing that mythical city of El Dorado, Bill. Keep going, buddy. Best to you. But yeah, I like Jeffersonian kind of blend with realism because our industries would be incredibly strong, Mike. And that is it's amazing because isn't that what China's doing now, right? So over the break, I said, ask yourself why China doesn't do this. And yet their relative power keeps improving because as we continue to get basically baited and bled and even bloodletting, as that we continue to allow this to happen to ourselves, China is like, you know what? We can increase our power and relative power through industry and military and obviously economy. We can continue to do that. But really, the U.S. is so stupid, which is what one of their famous generals, I don't want to get into it, he said years ago. We just have to kind of maintain this, where we are now, relatively speaking. We don't need some great surge because they're kind of doing what Jefferson would have said to do, Jeffersonian approach. They're so stupid, they're going to change the balance of power for us. And so there's no risk in us being showing aggression in most of these cases. We start messing around with Korea without including them, and we start messing around in the South China Sea without including them. Yes, then they start to beat their chest like a bunch of gorillas. Because that is what Putin is doing right now. And that is what we would do if Putin was in Alberta or across from Niagara Falls. That is what we would be doing. But for the most part, they're like, we just got to sit here and let these idiots destroy themselves. And by the way, the end of that essay did not end well because they don't let us just decline peacefully. They intend to punish us for what they view to be the exploitation of the Chinese people before, definitely during the open door policy, and even after. They were once raped and pillaged by Western countries, led by the United States, and they have not forgotten. And the Chinese do not intend to just let us walk away a weakened superpower while they dominate their regional hemisphere. No, they intend to punish us for the humiliation and the servitude that we put on them. So everybody better take their heads out of there real quick, because maybe that won't happen to us. But do you have children? I do. Do you want grandchildren? I do. If you're older and you already have them, what about their kids? Or them when they get older? At this rate, hell, it took Joe Biden a year to thrust the world into chaos and weaken the United States by a factor of 10. A year! 1 year! In 1 year, we're no longer energy independent and we don't have that leverage. In 1 year, inflation has gone up by at least a 40-year record. In 1 year, our society has become markedly less free. In 1 year, we purged the true warriors out of many areas of our military. I was told, actually, I don't want to get into too much, but when they say military advisors, ladies and gentlemen, they do mean boots on the ground. That means ODAs from Fort Bragg or elsewhere, but in this case, it was Fort Bragg he was going, are going to Ukraine. And the ODAs, which are Green Berets, are going to train and advise soldiers on the ground. They don't sit there with like a phone in their hand, guys. Like, okay, left flank, rocket launchers, line up, anti-tanks, somebody get a javelin, aisle 2, somebody get a javelin, aisle 2. They fight with them and die with them. And unfortunately, the readiness of some of these ODAs was destroyed. I spoke to somebody who lost his captain on his ODA. These people have been together for years. An ODA gets very tight. They are each other's family. Why did they lose their captain? The vaccine mandate. We know pilots over here, Marine and Navy. What's left? A less combat effective unit. Let's get real. We can't even beat, like I said a couple weeks ago, we can't even beat sandal-wearing goat herders in Afghanistan. We're going to take on the Spetsnaz now? Get out of here. All right. Let's see. Border Patrol. I don't know. That's something I meant to ask Robert. When I saw about Border Patrol agents potentially going to Poland, I immediately thought to ask Robert whether that's legal. Apparently, George from the Gaggle, who I will be on next Monday with, him and Peter come on our show once a month. I go on their show once a month. Apparently, Barnes, George, and Viva did an incredible, I didn't see the whole thing, but what I did see was amazing, stream on Ukraine. And it was 2 nights ago. I'm starting to lose days. Was it Wednesday night? Fantastic. And I meant to ask him whether or not it was in fact legal. I think he probably addressed that on Wednesday, but I'm not a lawyer. I'll find out. But I didn't hear that part of it. And I did get a text from somebody who said that they did make some mention of it. Briefly brought up the idea of, protecting the Polish border. I want to check it out and see, but I'll find out. I don't know because I'm not a lawyer, but I will find out. This is maddening. It's mad for sure. Don't let them protect our own border, but send them to someone else's border to protect. It's just nuts. What would the world look like if we stopped all foreign aid, but CIA to 1/4, cut the CIA to 1/4? You know what? Rand Paul, Mike Lee, others have done a lot of work on this. Like, what does foreign aid actually do? Foreign aid, I'm totally against it. I mean, to be honest, personally, I want my own. And this is the thing. I am always, as a pollster, remain as impartial as I can on my own views. But all pollsters have views, and it's intellectually dishonest to you to pretend like that we don't have views. So, like, acting as if you're impartial or something is bullcrap. You're still a human being, and you still have issues. But look, on the issue of war, and even greater foreign policy issue itself, nobody should be impartial if they have knowledge of it, especially. Like, I don't know what the head of a teachers union is doing, putting out a press release about a Russian invasion. You can't even do your own damn job right. But if you have knowledge on the subject, if you have ever participated, then you know what? It's almost like you got a damn duty to speak up. You have a duty to. Because these people never fight these conflicts themselves. Nobody should be impartial when it comes to war and the loss of human life. Or worse, the weakening of a weakening or flat out destruction of the stabilizing force? Because, that's a great question by Mike. It's a great question. Because they will try to scare you into thinking that, geez, all would just collapse. The truth is, foreign aid is really about making the Western elites money and exerting their influence. And Robert Barnes and I did a great What Are the Odds about this last year, especially when we're talking about essentially the collapse of potentially the Abraham Accords and Biden squandering all of Donald Trump's diplomatic gains in the Mideast, which led to the conflict between Palestine and Israel. And it's like, well, we give them the Iron Dome, and some people would argue that's still valuable because if you lived before the Iron Dome, you would know that those daily pictures of Hamas, killing everyone in the streets, like sitting on a cafe, getting on a mass transportation. I mean, long before the Iron Dome, we saw what Hamas really was. Now Israel gets blamed for a lot only because they have that dome protecting them. Those pictures, those horrifying pictures, aren't there to show people what would have happened if that rocket fell in Jerusalem like it did in the 90s. I don't think that Mike Lee and Rand Paul, it's not just CIA, but FBI too. And people want to know why they only want to refer to themselves as CIA, like I said before. You're going to love this. Do you say the God? Or do you just say God? That's what they think of at the company. They don't believe the CIA should be referenced because CIA is like God. So you will never, I joke you not. And this dates back to the founding of that damn agency. Like I told you, we say God, country, right? They say CIA first. So they don't, they really think something of themselves. But the work that Rand Paul has done and others have done really seems to suggest these people don't stop anything. The CIA should be cut because if they want to still serve a function in any capacity, because right now they're so big, they're meddling in domestic affairs, which is really illegal and they should not be doing. But they are. If they didn't have the resources to do that, and they were only, at station chiefs abroad and stuff like that, then maybe just being weakened and smaller, they would be less corrupt. I don't know. I mean, it's a good theory to have. In the end, I think that the Marshall Plan post-World War II, which was an effort not to repeat, like E.H. Carr said, it's an effort not to repeat the mistake we made after World War I, which was to leave Germany just in rubble. We didn't want to leave Europe in rubble, supposedly, because we didn't want to create another Adolf Hitler-like environment, or an environment that made it easy for someone like Hitler to rise. I don't really think foreign policy post the Marshall Plan has been effective at all. Definitely not in nation building or stabilization. It simply has not. What it ends up getting used as is what we're seeing now in Ukraine. They took your money, the taxpayer dollar, and they gave it to Ukraine. In exchange, they demanded that Ukraine expand its domestic energy sector. Hunter Biden and other elites in the ruling class then get that money that is circulated through that sector and just actual funds that went to you. So who are they going to use to expand their sector? Well, of course, folks, companies that employ our ruling class, that are owned by our ruling class. It's really a scheme for the ruling class to take your taxpayer dollars and get rich off of them. And in case you weren't paying attention, that is what the Ukraine-based impeachment of Donald Trump was all about. It had nothing to do with Donald Trump's transcript. Donald Trump released the transcript to prove that what the report said was false. Vindman leaked a false report. The New York Times, MSNBC, CNN, they just decided to edit that transcript, to cut 500 words out here, to remove a response here, to make it sound the way they wanted it to sound. The text messages that were used during the actual investigation publicly, in front of everybody, day in and day out. Heard testimony from ambassadors, this and that. They just decided that you were going to see some of those messages and you were going to see other messages and others you were not. So, they knew what they were doing. That was about the scam. That was about exposing the scam. That was about getting rid of a man who, number one, is trying to stop the scam, and number two, trying to punish people who are financially benefiting from this scam. And the scam is foreign aid. It had everything to do with foreign aid and nothing to do with Donald Trump doing something inappropriate, because he didn't. Everything is a quid pro quo in foreign policy. And in fact, in Washington, the passage of a bill is a quid pro quo. You scratch my back, I scratch yours. You vote for my bill, I vote for yours. That's how that freaking city operates. It's a currency. It's not illegal, especially not in foreign policy. It's all a quid pro quo, which you will probably hear and read in any of these books. All right. Yeah, where's their gold? Where's that? Right, Aaron, 80s Aaron. What happened to the Libyan precious metals? I don't know. Did we ever get to the bottom of that? I can't remember either. What happened to they had a vast energy sector, but Gaddafi died. Sidney Blumenthal and his buddies, they're now operating without prejudice in Libya. Gaddafi's dead. It's a failed state. Well, who knows? Whatever. Yeah, the Ukrainian Revolution, Western backed, I assume. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Without a doubt. That's a good one. Yeah, you're talking about the recent one under Obama. Yeah, absolutely. They wanted that guy gone. Because it really was a matter of who is going to benefit from their resources. Is it going to be Russia or is it going to be us? The difference here is, even though it always strikes me odd, is that because Putin he's also a realist. He takes that money to satisfy the oligarchs so they can allow him to operate the way he does. It's part of how he is so strong and powerful ruling that nation. But he still does what's in the national interest. Our elites do not. When it comes to Libya, right? Was that in our national interest? This is why Carr would say we're screwed. Because not only do they have no ability to let things go that are not in the national interest at this point, they're not even really operating for it. I think E.H. Carr would argue that. Biden is willing to make you, like I say, pay $10 at the pump as long as Hunter gets, more money. It's sad. But they think they're acting in that national interest because they think that when they do well, the country is doing well. That's the problem with our elites. They think their situation is synonymous with the national situation. Nothing can be further from the truth. Of course, they hurt people. The better they do, the worse the rest of the country is doing. I think that's very clear. That was true under Barack Obama. The wealth gap exploded under Barack Obama. Donald Trump actually began to shrink it at a pace we have not seen in a very long time. Minorities, blacks, and Hispanics, wage growth actually outpaced white working class wage growth. You would have thought they would have been thrilled. The left would have been thrilled. He's basically doing what they had been promising to do for decades. Instead, they come back in and they put it back to Obama land, only with a rudderless ship. With a senile old man and a simpleton vice president. It's worse. Worse. Yeah, the fact that Brexit, Brit Shirley, the fact that this war breaks out while Trump is out of office counters the narrative that Biden was a safe pair of hands, added to the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. There's without a doubt Biden's weakness with Taiwan, which started this, his weakness in the Middle East, that all preceded Afghanistan. We just weren't paying attention to it because COVID. But then the situation in Afghanistan occurred. And this was the wink to Putin. He had already ended the pipelines, ended fracking, greatly reduced it. Went after Anwar, ended that after Trump got Anwar, started going after Anwar. If you're not following the North American Rig Index, which we used to do on People's Pundit Daily, before Big Tech came after us, oh God, we're so dangerous. We're tracking the Rig Index, the rig count, the North American rig count. Oh my God, run! The rig count has collapsed under Joe Biden. He created a perfect situation where Putin would sit down and say, okay, you know what? Here's what they're going to do to me. All right. I know what they're going to do. And their media outlets are going to call them crippling sanctions. We're going to be just fine. Because in the end, their own allies need us. We're going to isolate the U.S. from their own allies. And by the way, we're going to make really chummy with India and China. This is worth whatever pain my oligarchs have to feel. And I can sell this to them. And he is going to sell it to them. He already sold it to them. That's why he pulled the trigger. The Western media is so stupid. No, the oligarchs are not going to turn on Putin because of Biden's weak-ass sanctions. If you wanted to hurt Putin, you should have kept Trump's sanctions on. So while Biden went after our own energy sector and made us energy dependent again, after we were independent for the first time since Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right after he did that, he took Trump's sanctions off. Trump was far harder on Russia than Obama or Biden. Weakness has led us here. Weakness. And Russia calculated that relative power is a go. A little off topic here. Colorado was a tough state to win. I'm not sure which one you mean, what race you're talking about. Statewide, it's a very tough state. Are you talking about governors? Whatever. If you're more specific, or congressional district, unfortunately, redistricting didn't go great there for Republicans either. I got word from a source that a German... Oh, I know. I recognize that name. Yeah. How Joe Bujian. I got word from a source that the German establishment is doubling down on NATO and fearing what would happen if Trump regains the presidency. Yeah. This is good. Evidently, according to my source, the Democrats said to them in Munich that this would not happen, as they will measure to ensure a Biden victory. Thoughts on this? Yeah, I got to tell you, this idea that it's only our own elites who really conspired against this guy, he was really challenging the entire status quo that I just spent 2 hours railing against. And nobody would do that. They really are. They are freaking terrified. Have you read Matthew Dowd's column? They're terrified. And they're going to push to use this commission. They will try some way to legally bind Donald Trump from running for president again. They will charge him with something. 2 weeks before Christmas, the Capitol was in a complete meltdown. I was hearing people that I was hearing from people that I don't even really like, and they don't even really like me. But they were calling me. We had put that poll out. These people were scared. And okay. So tell me, what are the odds that, let's say he does win? It's early. I know it's early. But let's say he does win. Would you think he would be stronger or weaker? They're afraid. And by the way, 2022 has a lot to do with answering that question. You get duped by the establishment, and Donald Trump does come back in 2024, you're going to leave him to the wolves again. If you keep electing these people, you're going to leave the man to the wolves. That's a great. I do have, that's something, and I'm not at all surprised to hear that because I too have some people that I know that deal with NATO and these other countries, and they were, what is the word? Inconsolable. When Donald Trump when he was president, and he made the comments that he made, they were, inconsolable. That's the word. They just couldn't believe it. These people want to be permanent forever. They have really good lives and a lot of power, and they have no intention of trying to give that up. What is a fallout on Ukraine? How it will impact Europe in general? Macron, being a failed broker, might incur the nationalist ire. That's what I'm thinking about too. For faltering here in the French elections, given the new line in Europe, what will happen in Sweden and Finland, who indicate they want to join NATO? Will Russia blackmail or invade them too? The EU on the whole looks to be a lesser loser project after this. It is. It's called the bicycle theory, where they do need to keep adding member states in order to remain viable. And there was only ever so many, times you could pedal, right? So bicycle theory, because you're pedaling. The minute you stop pedaling, you fall over. The EU has always been a bicycle theory, and nobody serious argues that it's not. It's always been doomed. If I think Russia, if they come out stronger on this thing, Sweden, Finland, and others, but Germany will eventually. None of their populations have the appetite for this. I also too, not only with Macron in France, I wonder how it will impact in Great Britain, because you got Boris over there, and he's trying to make amends for being duped by the pandemic porn pushers, and he's trying to make amends for that. The British people hate war. They hate war. They hate conflict. They don't want to pay more for petrol because of Ukraine. Look at what they did. They bailed on us immediately. Poor Tony Blair. They bailed on us immediately in Iraq. One thing went wrong and they just flipped out. These are not allies, really, So in the end, I really think, that, did I read him? Sojourning wants to know. I really think in the end, the EU is kind of, it's doomed, and NATO is at this point already irrelevant. Maybe it'll figure out some way to wiggle out of this thing and look like, they can save face. But I think, guys, at the end of the day, it doesn't have a mission anymore. It doesn't serve a purpose. And its member states are weak. They're weak. The U.S. is weakening and can't carry them forever. So, time will tell whether Putin made the right call here, and whether or not he kind of just needed to hang back. And because we're gonna fail on our own, as the Chinese believe, and I think rightfully so. If we don't change the course here, we're gonna fail on our own anyway. So Putin will just be left, to sift through the spoils, man. Pick and choose what he wants. Look, I don't mean to sound negative. I think it's important that we tell the truth, especially if you want to reverse course, change course. It's important that we're very honest about where we are right now. We are a very weak country with an inept, senile leader, with a bunch of crooked and idiotic, ignorant, whatever you want to say, people that surround them, including the vice president, who's a total simpleton. And they're all scramming, which is why his policy is always so incoherent. Because that's how a White House works. And usually hopefully, there's a strong president who listens to all of them. They're, fighting for his ear. But then he makes a decision and he sticks with it. They stay consistent until something says they need to change course, maybe more information. This is a daily, incoherent White House. That is because it's a rudderless ship. That's how a White House works. And it's leading to disaster. I did study John Mearsheimer in college, Sojourning, and of course he is a staple for anybody who studies. I studied a lot in college. I love how people on Twitter think they know, my education or something. But I took a side trip, right, Laura? Took a side trip. Decided it was a State Department program. But everybody who was running it hated the State Department. And I loved international relations. I took like at least 18 credits a semester. And I loved it. And I was like, wow, you know what? I can kind of do this. And I could probably do it in a bachelor in like 14 months at the rate I'm going. I'm serious. So I did it because that's all I had to do. I just wanted to take a break and just study a lot. And he's a staple. John Mearsheimer is a staple. At this point, nobody really argues whether or not John Mearsheimer is right or wrong about his central thesis. He's right. It's just more, and especially in realism, it's more of like a fight between him and someone like Ken Waltz. I didn't have the book here. I didn't have time to dig it up. I really should mention it. Man, the State War. He's written other books, yes. But that book is the one that is a challenge to John Mearsheimer. Mearsheimer's Tragedy of Great Power Politics came after, because he argues with Waltz, who's really, it's a difference between offensive realism and defensive realism. And they are probably the godfathers of each of their schools. I side with Mearsheimer. I do. Because it's human history. Yes, it does hurt, Nathan. It does hurt the Republican Party not to have a unifying message on this. Yes. Take that big tent stuff talk and tell them to stick it up their butts. This country is opposed to intervention in Ukraine by 2-1 at least. 20+% want to intervene in this war. It is not only the wrong policy, it is political stupidity. Strategically. Is Joe Biden trying to have a lower approval rating than 06 Ukraine leader? I read a 3%. You know, in some of the polling, it bounced back some, but in others, it took an even bigger dive. I was stunned to see the Siena College poll. Did you guys see it? That was they polled for the New York Times. They still do, as far as I know. They're among the worst pollster, the most pro-Biden poll. They are in our worst pollster of 2020 list with Quinnipiac and Morning Consult and others. They had Biden like 36, I think it was, or 34. It was bad. Really bad. That's it. But yes, that's a great point. Owen, is détente and normalization with Russia even possible anymore? Not under this administration, Owen. No way. If Trump won and DeSantis had 2 turns after, I think Russia would still be China's ally. I don't know what we could do at this. I don't even know what we could do at this point. You know, I think that's a valid concern. I do. Because of what they have done. They went too far. Donald Trump could have made a good relationship with Russia. He could have. Even with, look at how much he was able to accomplish with them. Even with all of the lies and the straw man stuff. I mean, the new age McCarthyism. See, we got to find a new term than that, because McCarthy was right about the communists in our government and in Hollywood. They were never right about the threat Putin posed and, the collusion. That was a lie. McCarthy wasn't lying. So it's not even right to call it McCarthyism. It was something else. And I fear too, let me finish reading though. If I were Russia or Putin, I wouldn't believe anything we said. Putin has basically said this in his Oliver Stone interviews. It doesn't matter who the president is and how genuine their desires, they don't actually change things. At this point, I really do believe that, which is why I did very much favor how Donald Trump dealt with Putin, because it's like you had either the idealistic, naive nonsense of Hillary Clinton and a reset button, or you had Russia, 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 the boogeyman, 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 Putin, Putin, get under the bed. There was no happy medium. And then Donald Trump came along and was like, yeah, he's a bad guy and he's looking out for Russian interests. Guess what? That's what leaders do. But we need to have decent relations with him, like he worked with him on ISIS. Decent relations with him so we don't push him into the arms of Xi Jinping. That was the way to go about it at this point. But you have to do it in a way like Trump did, which is like, listen, man, I may be a little crazy. Don't mess with me, man. Don't take Ukraine. Don't do it. I swear to God, I'll take those turrets out. I swear to God, those golden turrets will fall. And the left mocked them for it, but it was genius. It was genius. And then let your economic power just bend their knee, Owen. And that was Trump's strategy. And by the way, it was working. The Chinese were on both knees before the virus leaked. Was Adam Schiff and Alex Soros doing in Ukraine a few days ago? Adam Schiff has been taking money from Ukrainian oligarchs and gun runners for years. Of course, that never came up in the impeachment. Stunning. Why was the CIA in Libya? Good question. Good question. He was cooperating. Guys, go to WikiLeaks. Just type it in. You'll find it. It's sad to read. He knew what they were doing, but he was like, all he could do was beg. I did what you wanted me to do. We've done this. We've done that. Why are you still doing this to us? Why are you still meddling and destabilizing? Where's our humanitarian aid? Where's that medicine you promised us? I did everything I told you I would do. Why are you forsaking me? And by the way, what does that tell Vladimir Putin? Right? What does that tell Kim Jong-un? They know. Maybe the only ones in the world who don't know what we do are the leftists backing Joe Biden's move in Ukraine right now. And the neocons, who are leftists, by the way. Neocons are leftists. Just as fascism is a form of socialism. Neocons believe in nation building. Conservatives believe that nations and governments are inherently corrupt and incompetent. So if you're a conservative, how on earth could you think that we can't do good government here, but we can do it overseas and impose it on someone else's people? That's not conservative. They only got that name because they rode Ronald Reagan's coattails. It wasn't because they agreed with Ronald Reagan. They didn't. They have always been communists. Bill Kristol's daddy was a nutcase communist, Irvin Kristol. Yeah, that's why that's SGG 69. Any chance of doing a poll of truckers to see what percentage supports the convoy? Also can ask if they would be willing to refuse deliveries to New York City and DC. You mean of truckers? Ooh. Let me look into that, because that may be cheaper than doing like a national poll. Sometimes it really just depends. Sometimes I have to oversample so much because it's such a small subgroup that it isn't going to be smaller. But let me look into that. I like that idea. Laura, I like that idea. Yeah, on the Manhattan case, look, this is what I'm telling you. Yeah, my thoughts are that these persecutions against Donald Trump are political persecutions, of course. But not only worry about Trump's lawyers. I mean, you saw the New York, some of them going after Donald Trump were like disgraced for prosecutorial misconduct. The media just won't cover this stuff. I don't know what to say. But yes, they will use any friend they have in and out of the federal government, in and out of local and state elected office, friends on committees in Congress. They know they're going to lose the House. They believe that. So they're going to try to get this done quickly so there can be some kind of legal prohibition for Donald Trump to run. They know at this point they cannot beat him in an election. The COVID measures are gone now, guys, in many of these states. Pennsylvania is not going to amend their constitution anytime soon to do that. Neither will Michigan or Wisconsin, who also had rulings that these things were unconstitutional. Georgia, stupidity. But still, if you were president, how would you get the U.S. and Russia to be legitimate economic and military partners? In the beginning, as like piggybacks off of what Owen said, in the beginning, you're not going to be able to do that. You kind of have to force them to the table I would domesticate a lot of these industries that really came to the forefront at the end of COVID. I would definitely become energy independent again. I mean, that hurt Putin more than anything. But I would also forge alliances that are different new world alliances, which will cause them to think. And I would get out of their damn affairs. I don't give a rat's you know what about Ukraine or any other of the Eastern Bloc. I would tell them, look, Poland is the line because Poland was always resisting USSR, you want to call it aggression or whatever. Poland really was among the few countries that said, we don't want to be a part of your alliance, your pact. So I would say, listen, historically speaking, the Polish never wanted you. The rest of them did. This is your line. You cross it, I'm hurting you. Bad. Maybe you'll hurt us back, but I'm going to hurt you bad. That's it. So don't mess with me. Otherwise, let's be friends. I'm energy independent. You can have these chumps. Me, I'm going to use my new energy independence to let the Japanese roll. I'm going to help India roll. The Indians want nothing more to be allies with us, or at least that legitimate part of that government. They wanted that. They loved Donald Trump. They were like, finally, a non-interventionist who understands the value of friendship when it comes to these guys. And they mean Pakistan and China. But at this rate, Putin is going to be the bridge between India and China. And then we're just screwed. Totally screwed. So at first, that's a great question. At first, really, I would have to be a little Trumpian in the beginning, although I would have did things a lot different than Trump. I wouldn't have threatened with NATO. I would have just done it. NATO's extinct. NATO's a dinosaur, and NATO is weak. I want a new alliance, a new balancing coalition. And excuse me if I want to reject the wimps of the 20th century for those who are strong and really at its core do share our values. Like I question, does the French share our values anymore? It was 200 plus years ago. What the hell are you talking about? They've moved one era after another towards totalitarianism. Tons of sympathizers during the Nazi occupation. They haven't been, they haven't been the spirit of the French Revolution, folks, in a long time. Britain is weak. Britain is very weak. I don't really see the value in that either. The Japanese are preserving, they believe, they don't care what you call them, what name you call them. They believe in preserving their imagined community. I like that because their imagined community is strong. And it favors strength and it holds up strength. It's not something to be embarrassed of or ashamed of. They're proud of it. I say let them fly. I did want to bring this up real quick. This will be, I guess this is Ian's again. Has Biden miscalculated with his SCOTUS pick? Graham looks to be pushing back now against his pick, Jackson. I wouldn't be shocked if Graham just caves because that's what Graham does. But to think like, not that I'm picking on Scott Adams, but he said it was politically stupid to oppose this pick and to just move on, win other elections. That's not supported by empirical evidence at all. Number one. Number two, that's a serious disconnect from the Republican base. It seems like you really don't understand the Republican base if you argue that point like Scott Adams did. The Republican base wants a fight now. That's the Democrats always do. The Democrats accused a man of upstanding character, whether or not I think I like him as a justice or not is irrelevant. He had a perfect reputation. And the Democrats accused this man of being a serial gang rapist. They opposed him with every fiber in their being. They had the FBI investigating every facet of his life, and they trotted out psychopathic women with long histories of mental illness to accuse him of rape. Who's in the White House now? Scott? Who's running the Senate now? Scott? What political danger do you see there? Truth is, there's just no evidence to back up your claim. What will happen is you will risk demotivating the Republican base by being a coward and a betrayer and bending like it looks like Graham will bend. I mean, look, I'm not saying he will. I'm not saying he is right now. I'm saying that his history suggests he will bend over anyway. All right, so who supports going into war with... I'm going to bring that up. Do I have the link for the public polling project, the last one? Ooh, what a great question. We're going to end with this one. All right. Oh, I love this one. Share the screen. Chrome tab. Share the screen. Dun-dun. Oh, I love this question. Let's take a look. So what the question was who supports going to war in Ukraine based on education? I love that question. Let's look at the broad, and then we'll look at the high school or less, 29.8%. Some college associate, 25.1%. Undergraduate, 25.3%. Postgraduate, roughly the same, 22.2%. So, that's kind of funny because it looks like high school or less is a little bit more than the rest. And then generally across the board, it's just simply not supported by a bunch at all. But we can look a little bit deeper. And this one is specifically airstrikes. Pre-high school seems to be skewing that. So can we be real for a second, ladies and gentlemen? Not the traditional working class that you're thinking of, but the Democratic underclass. Yeah, let me look at white, non-white, Hispanic, non-white, not Hispanic, I mean. Yeah, I mean, it's not statistically significant, but it is a little bit surprising here how some of these postgraduates don't. Isn't that interesting? Let's look at Hispanic working class versus non-Hispanic. There you go. It's from the more minority underclass. That's where it's coming from. Democratic voters. That's a great question. And then let's look at putting U.S. troops on the ground. Is there any difference there? Wow, look at that. Yeah, it's coming from, and I'm actually curious to see race detail here. Let's see race. Yeah, whites, 2089, let's call it. It's, it is African Americans and Hispanics who are slightly more, not slightly, they're more than whites. But when you look at them by education, it's not high school, it's less. It's that less pre-high school. That's what's really skewing it. Wow, that's interesting. What a great question. Let's see age. You want to look at age? Let's look at age. Democratic groups, ladies and gentlemen. Democratic groups. 18 to 24. It's a complete reversal from their typical position because they're just instinctively supporting their party. You know what I mean? And they're anti-Russia. If you guys remember the biggest enemy, greatest threat poll that we did, the country did not see Russia as a big threat. About a fifth did. And who was that coming from? Democrats, especially younger Democrats, by the way. That's interesting. Very, very interesting. Whereas the older you are, the wiser I guess you get when it comes to war. These people remember being lied to in Iraq. That's what it comes down to. Definitely this, because you have some of the older people in this group. And then definitely this. You can see it go up and progress. These people remember being lied to in Iraq. On and on and on. See if the age compression holds. Generally, yeah. Yep. I mean, it's, close, very close here. But that's why 30 to 44, we broke it down, 30 to 39 to see which ones. And I think some of those younger 30 to 35, they probably want to work, and they're thinking about inflation. So they don't give a damn about foreign entanglements. That was a great question. Very good question. And yeah, I want to see more about that NVIDIA cyber attack. I saw that from Jimette could trigger a bigger conflict, like the Colonial Pipeline. You know, that was supposed to be Putin, right? There was never any evidence that it was. It was like they were using that cyber attack to try to gin up anti-Putin, pro-war. It didn't work. It just didn't work at that time. People were like, no, this is Biden's fault. Remember the cyber attack approval? They blamed Biden for not protecting us. They did not blame Vladimir Putin. Remember that? That was very interesting. All right, so with that in mind, I'm over, but I want to do that because we had, kind of missed the show. Even though we made it up Monday, it's like, kind of threw off the rest of the week. But yeah, so I'm gonna roll now. Went a little over. I will put up on Locals every single book we talked about here today. And, if you want to get them, great. I'll put them in order of which I think you need to read them. Oh, one I forgot. When we're talking about how potentially there can be personal interests that influence traditional realism, without a doubt, The Long Road to Baghdad is a fantastic book. They're anti-Bush. I'm going to tell you, they're pretty much the old school of liberal realism, where, Lloyd Gardner, he would have argued, he would not. I don't know where he comes down now. I would like to see his recent thoughts. But if he wants to be intellectually honest, he would come against the war in Ukraine, because he was very much arguing that the Bushes and the foreign policy establishment, that 9/11 was just an excuse to trigger the invasion in Iraq, that it had been going on long before with the neocons. They wanted it for realpolitik, and they just lied to the country on purpose, and they couched their rhetoric, as always, in morality and morality with falsely. And, that this is something like that would very much be akin to what we're seeing today with Biden. Obviously, the neoliberals have wanted Ukraine for a while. They have, interests in there. Whether or not they think it's in the best interest of the country as a whole, I can't dive into their minds and pull out, that. I tend to think that they're elites. And elitists believe that what's best for them is best for everybody, right? So it would fall very much in line. It's like what the Bushes were to Iraq, the Bidens and the Obama, cabal are to Ukraine. So another great book. And I'll put them all up on Locals. All right. So I'm going to kick rocks. I'm going to get out of here. Don't forget, before I go, sign up to Rumble. Okay. And if you are watching on YouTube, give us a thumbs up if you like the video. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the notification bell. That'll let you know when we're going to go live. Follow me on Getter at People's Pundit. No underscore on Getter like there is on Twitter. Just at People's Pundit. But definitely watching on Rumble. See the Locals button right above me. peoplespundit.locals.com. Join the community. Become a supporter. And help us bring some incredible 2022 election coverage, because that is what it's going to come down to. And I really have some big plans, big old plans, but we got to get there, and we got to get there soon. I'm being a little bit pushy here because it will take us a lot of time to prepare, and we'll go from there. All right. So keep that in mind. Thanks for watching the show. Have a fantastic weekend. Locals, I'll see you soon. Everyone have a safe weekend as well. Thanks for watching Inside the Numbers. See you on Monday. Oh yeah. Laura, yell at me. Monday, the Gaggle, 10 a.m. Don't miss it. All right, here's Bad Habit. Special thanks to the Bowen Band. I'm out.
How much you wanna bet that I can get you back inside your head before the summer ends, and spread a little love. Just for a little fun, I'll make you come back to me before the rise of every sun. Baby, it's meant to be. I know you got a man, but he don't understand. You're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you can toss me like a cigarette. 'Cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah. Rhythm in our love, it's impressive, excessive. You can't make this stuff up. My chest beats, it's restless, wakes the neighbors up above. Yeah, baby, come and show me love. Baby, come and show me love. Because you're gonna be a heartbreaker. You're such a love taker. So just suck me in and you a cigarette, 'cause I just wanna be a bad habit, yeah.
We can get on a plane and take a one-way ride, steal us away to find a place we can hide. It wouldn't take much to spear for a night, just to give into the need and leave it all behind.
'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away. 'Cause I know that you know that I know that you want me. You told me, now show me, come blow me away.